the serviceful thou art service, to the lover thou art love, to the lover thou art love, to the sorrowful thou art sympathy, to the sorrowful thou art sympathy, to the yogi thou art bliss, to the yogi thou art bliss, oh to the yogi thou art bliss, to the yogi thou art bliss. O God beautiful, O God beautiful, O God beautiful, O God beautiful. At thy feet, oh, I do bow. At thy feet, oh, I do bow. O God beautiful, O God beautiful, O God beautiful, O God beautiful. At thy feet, oh, I do bow. At thy feet, oh, I do bow. O God beautiful, 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 O God beautiful.
Let's start with a prayer. Get centered. Feel your heart energy and the point between the eyebrows. And feel that you're offering this prayer from your heart up through the point, through the spiritual eye, and broadcasting it out. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, great masters, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Guru, Paramahansa Yogananda Ji, saints of all religions, beloved Master, beloved Swamiji, we gratefully and lovingly lay the flowers of our devotion at thy feet. We thank you for this path, giving purpose to life. And we thank you for the company of each other, this divine friendship, a community of souls, all seeking thy light. Help us in our meditations and in our service, that we live the kind of life that you would have us live. Om, peace. Amen.
So I think the choir is going to do some music, so we'll switch seats. Probably have to move the chairs.
choir members out there? Anybody want to join the choir? You can sing if you know the words. Come on up. Or we'll sing "Cherish These" and "Make Us Channels." And the men harmonize on "Make Us Channels," right? The second verse.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll make us channels. And a couple of us have harmony.
That's good, close.
Cherish these.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Okay.
Which song first?
Cherish these. Yes.
Is there anywhere on earth perfect freedom, sorrow's dearth, selfless friendship, blameless mirth? Cherish these, not else has worth. Is there anywhere on earth perfect freedom, sorrow's dearth, selfless friendship, blameless birth? Cherish these, naught else has worth. Is there anywhere on earth perfect freedom, sorrow's dearth, selfless friendship, blameless birth? Cherish these, naught else has worth.
Let's see, Lord Most High. Where's our note?
Lord Most High, our Heavenly Father, all our lives we dedicate to Thee. All our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasure, all our melody. Make us each a channel of Thy peace. When in darkness, guide us from above. Where there's sorrow, may we sow Thy joy. Where there's hatred, may we share Thy love. Lord Most High, our Heavenly Father, all our lives we dedicate to Thee. All our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasure, all our melody. Make us each a channel of Thy peace. When in darkness, guide us from above. Where there's sorrow, may we sow Thy joy. Where there's hatred, may we share Thy love.
Thanks, Lord.
Well, I'm going to start with a couple of interesting factoids that you probably haven't heard before. One is that that last song was taken from the very well-known prayer of St. Francis, but the prayer of St. Francis may not have come from St. Francis. It may very well have come, the first time it was found was in the breviary of William the Conqueror. And those famous words, where there's hatred, let me share thy love, and so on. Then the next factoid is when we were in, I think many of you know that Yogananda said that St. Francis is kind of our patron saint. And so I always just accepted that as being something interesting. But when we were on pilgrimage in Spain last fall in September, we came across a very interesting fact, and that's that Master in that life was King Ferdinand, and he was one of the major kings, a warrior from childhood, who helped drive the Moors and bring Christianity back into Spain and the Iberian Principle. But
Peninsula.
Pardon?
Peninsula.
What did I say?
I think it's a principle.
Principle. The principle of Christianity into the peninsula. But the realm of Ferdinand's father was in northern Spain, and across northern Spain is the El Camino de Santiago. Santiago is St. Mark, and he was buried there. St. Francis came to that Santiago, the Camino, and he walked across it, asking the Moors to at least leave one sacred spot for the Christians to be able to worship. As he passed through that, along that way, he passed through the realm of Ferdinand, and King Ferdinand, that we know as Master, was probably about 8 to 10 years old at the time. So it's very possible that as a child, Ferdinand met St. Francis. And then at the very end of his life, he asked that the crown be taken off, a priest come in, and he was dressed in the robes of a Franciscan monk. And he said, I have never considered myself a king. I have always considered myself a monk. So it gives more of a sense of the connection between our path and St. Francis. Then the final little factoid, and I think this happened when Master was giving a lecture, he had a vision of St. Francis, and from that vision came the poem God, 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 and the song that we know as God, God, God. So there's a very deep connection here. And part of the reason I bring this up at the beginning is that the sense of spiritual community goes way, way back in our line. And it's the gathering. It doesn't matter the particular outward form of the religion or the time or the language that we're living in, the time we're living in, the language that we're speaking. But I firmly believe that those who are long-term committed to Ananda, to this path, the particular form in this lifetime is Ananda. Form before was probably a Franciscan community. Form before that was probably an ashram in India. The outward form doesn't matter. It's the gathering together of like-minded souls seeking the same purpose in life that forms community. And so we're going to talk about community this morning. I'll talk a little bit, then Devi will talk a little bit, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. But I wanted to start by reading one of my favorite prayer demands from Whispers from Eternity. This is the prayer demand for illumination. O Spirit, beloved Father, Oversoul of the universe, Spirit of spirit, Friend of friends, teach me the mystery of my existence. Teach me to worship Thee in breathlessness and in deathlessness, In the fire of devotion, burn away my ignorance. In the silence of my soul, come, Spirit, come. Possess me and teach me to feel thy immortal presence in and around me. Come, Spirit, come. Come, Spirit, come. So, the reason in particular that I wanted to read that is the line in there, teach me the mystery of my existence. A few weeks ago, or couple of months ago, Devi and I gathered together. It started out we were going to have a day-long or most of a day-long retreat with the young leaders at Ananda Village. And so we started out with inviting about 15 or 20, those people who were already leading departments or playing major roles. And then others heard about that and they wanted in on it. So we ended up having a retreat with about 55 of the people with more or less a cutoff of 40 years old or younger. And it was a marvelous retreat, really, really good. But we started out, the purpose of the retreat was this. Now, I don't want to frighten you too much, but this was kind of the shock wave that we wanted to, to focus their minds. The statement was, starting on January 1st of next year, 2027, nobody older than 70 years old is going to be here in Ananda Village. What are you going to do about it? And 70 years old or older is about 55 or 60% of the community. So all of the elders would be gone. So the real purpose was to focus the mind, disaster preparation. You don't wait for the disaster to prepare for the disaster. You have to start ahead of time. So it was kind of to help illuminate those areas that we need to work on and develop to get ready, because it isn't going to happen all at once, but there is going to be a time, not too distant future, where nobody over 70 is going to be, or nobody over those who are currently 70 is going to be actively leading the community. But we started out with 2 questions, and I'm going to start the same 2 questions for you. The first question, and you have to answer in your own words, not hothouse. And if you have something to write down, fine. If you don't, just think about it. But the first question is, what is the purpose of Ananda? In your own words. What is and do it for Ananda in Portland, but also broader, but specifically, what is the purpose of Ananda in Portland? And take a few minutes to think about that, and I'll sit down while you're doing that. So we'll take about 3 or 4 minutes, but think in your own words what it is. Okay, we'll take about 1 more minute.
Anybody like a pen and notepad? Just show me in
I should have prepared Badri for this, but I didn't know I was going to do this till about 5 minutes ago.
This is the purpose of Ananda, right?
Yeah. Okay, so since you just got your notepads, you can do shorthand of your thoughts. So now the next question. So you've written in your own words, or thought in your own words, the purpose of Ananda here in Portland and broader. What is your purpose in life? And why are you at Ananda? In your own words, write that down. Okay, one more minute. Okay, now you can continue that later today if you want to tease out more, but the reason for starting with that, and with the story about Ferdinand and these past lives, is that it isn't really our present life that is the defining aspect of us. So what we do in this life, our occupation, even the community that we have, all of those things are very important, but they're important not for the reason most people think they are. You know, they're not important really in and of themselves. They're important for what we do is not nearly as important as what our consciousness becomes through what we do. Because there are millions and trillions of ways to, well, let's call it mill around in Maya. You know, everybody, so many people have some focus to their life, but the focus of their life is not the essence of their life, the essence of what they're living for. So somebody over there this morning was playing jazz saxophone, you know? So whoever, whether that was a recording or live, I don't know, but whoever that musician was that was doing that, that is a deep, deep focus of their life. So in their next life, assuming that they move on to a next life and they're not enlightened, because if they aren't, if they leave with any desires, then they have a next life to live through. So in their next life, it's almost 100% sure that they're not going to be a jazz saxophone player. But what will they have taken with them from doing that endeavor? focus of consciousness. To do that at a high level, you have to focus your energy, concentrate, creativity, lots and lots of things. I'm not going to try to list them. The point being that what we do is not very important, but what we become, what happens to our consciousness because of that is very important, because that's what we take on, and we take that on and we carry it from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. And our lifetimes go back a long, long ways. In my book, The Heart of Service, in the first chapter, I end the first chapter with a visualization. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I'll give it to you in essence. So imagine that you're in a big stadium, like a football stadium, and there are 100,000 seats in the stadium. And you're sitting in a front row seat at the very end, and everybody is, wherever you're sitting, would be to your left. And then you notice something as the rows go higher and higher and farther up. The roughest looking characters are sitting way up at the top, and they're rowdy, they're drinking, they're shouting, they're just really rough characters up there. And then they gradually, as it winds around, very gradually, people get more and more refined and better dressed, or dressed at all. Some of the guys up there aren't, And then you notice down in your row that not only are the people very refined, but they're also spiritual. And they're very similar to you in vibration. And then the realization comes. You aren't looking at different people, you're looking at your past lifetimes. Every one of those people represents a past lifetime that you've had. And gradually, whatever you've taken with you in that lifetime, you've carried into the next lifetime, and gradually, all of those lessons learned, you've come around and around and around 100,000 times. And that isn't even the beginning of how many we've actually done, but it's a convenient number for this visualization, until you've arrived at the point where you are now. And so in each one of those lifetimes, you've had something that you've focused on. And so we are in this lifetime. That's why we started with this. What is the purpose of your existence? What we're really trying to tease out is, what is your soul purpose? What is your soul trying to focus on in this particular lifetime? What are you trying to develop? Or what are you trying to leave behind? Until finally we're going to have a lifetime in which there's no more desire at all left to mill around in Maya. As Master said, lifetime after lifetime doing that, it finally takes on an anguishing sense of monotony. Because in every one of those lifetimes, we think that whatever that main thing that we were focused on is going to produce real happiness. And it never does. So that jazz saxophone player, whatever is underneath the surface, he thinks that by really focusing on that endeavor, maybe the money, the fame, the whatever, is going to bring him happiness. And it does, and then it doesn't. And then maybe it does a little bit, and then it doesn't. And then pretty soon it's an anguishing sense of monotony. And so we come then gradually into the sense that the only thing that we can do that is going to be ultimately fulfilling is not anything outward, but is something that develops our consciousness. And that brings us back to one of the purposes. Each of you probably had some slight variation on the purpose of Ananda Portland, Ananda in general, the community of spirit. that is Ananda, but it brings us back to the purpose of the community that is the Ananda ray, if we want to call that. And that's what Swamiji was saying in his little thing this morning. We are gathered together for not any particular outward thing, but we're gathered together in a community of like-minded souls to help support and create an environment that in our particular circumstances, living in this very day and year in Portland, Oregon, or wherever you live close to here, in these particular circumstances, we're trying to find an environment that maximizes the ability for us to expand consciousness. And that is the only purpose of Ananda. And then all of the other things that we get so focused on, building houses and creating beautiful gardens, and are we going to do a trellis that looks like this or a trellis that looks like this? What kind of flowers are we going to do? What should we do with the rest of the parking lot? What about the kitchen renovation? All of those things that we focus on are not about the things themselves. They're about coming together in a community of like-minded spirit, of consciousness, supporting and working together so that we can develop our consciousness in a more expansive way and leave behind some of the things that are holding us back. And so the real essence of Ananda is twofold. It is, as Masters defined our path, it is a combination of meditation and selfless service. And those two balance together. And as I say, I've just finished writing a book called The Heart of Service. But those two balanced together create a lifestyle purposely created in order to help with the expansion of consciousness until it continues to expand. And if you think, now I'm going to use another image, think of kind of a lacy material covering a ball of light. And as that light expands, that lacy material has to expand with it. And as the light gets bigger and bigger and bigger, that lacy material gets stretched thinner and thinner and thinner until it seemingly ceased to exist. That lacy material is our ego, but as our consciousness expands, that sense of our existence being the lace, not the light within the lace, the body, not the consciousness within the body, that grows thinner and thinner and thinner until you can't really observe it anymore. That's what we saw in Swami as his life went through its life arc. It was as if, and he had a extremely powerful, extremely magnetic personality. You know, it wasn't like, oh, he was such a wimp you couldn't even tell who he was. You definitely knew who that guy was. You know, he was a powerhouse. But as the arc of his life continued, his own self-identification with his personality grew thinner and thinner. Wasn't like his personality changed. He just didn't identify with it anymore. And that's the arc that all of us are going through. You know, we're going to retain our personality. We're going to retain this body more or less as we were genetically given a body in this lifetime. We're going to maintain that until the end of this particular incarnation. So that isn't, the outward things aren't going to change. The consciousness is going through an arc of what might call it evolution. And the evolution of that is that we grow less and less interested in identifying with anything outside, with any of that lacy part. And only interested in identifying with the light of our consciousness, the prayer for illumination, that we basically disappear and all that's left is light. So what helps us to do that is first meditation. If meditation is done right, the practice of meditation is secondary. Even the techniques are secondary. The purpose of meditation, Master said meditation can be defined as deep concentration on God or on one of the qualities of God. Light, sound, love, joy, wisdom, those eternal qualities, because they don't apply to any particular body or personality. They're universal qualities that get expressed in a particular way by the particular personality or incarnated soul that is expressing them. But so what we're really trying to do in meditation, techniques are to bring us into a state of consciousness where we have the identification that we're God or the combination of those qualities. And that, once we have that state of consciousness, that's what Master calls self-realization. And when we have the identification with those infinite qualities, what happens to us? Our consciousness becomes infinite because we are now not identified with anything that encloses us. We're identified with that which expands us ultimately to the incredible super expansion of God's consciousness. Now, nobody, including any of the great masters, can even begin to express the totality of God's consciousness. Master said, let me, as we heard in the prayer this morning, let me be just a humble little bubble, can't remember the exact word, in the heart of God's being. So all of us express a tiny bit of that, but it doesn't matter how much of it we express. What matters is how we identify ourselves. And part of that is through meditation we become more and more attuned to that which is universal, or if we have the kind of bhav, the vibration that worships God in form, then we take on more and more the identity of God in some form, generally the Guru. And so toward the end of Swami's life, he said, I don't know anymore where Kriyananda ends and Yogananda begins. It all seems one to me. And that is what happens when in deep meditation and in life, we identify ourselves more and more as simply an extension of God, the ray of God that has been sent to us through the Guru. And so as we identify with that, then that becomes our self-identification, not any of the quality of that lacy material that we had at the beginning. So the purpose of meditation is the expansion of consciousness. The purpose of service is that we don't meditate 24 hours a day. We should kind of try, but I doubt if anybody does meditate all the time without ever ceasing, let me know later, because I'd like to have a good conversation with you. But for the rest of us, we have a time of meditation and then we have the rest of the day. If we don't use the rest of that day in some kind of purposeful way that aligns with whatever you wrote, what is the purpose of your incarnation? If the rest of your day doesn't align with the purpose of your incarnation, then you need to re-steer the vehicle of your activity back until it is at least traveling along that same highway that leads to whatever the purpose of your life that you wrote down. And so part of that is that as we serve selflessly, as we work together, as we support each other in daily activities, so service should be all of those qualities that we are striving for in meditation. Meditation is silent communion with God. Service is active communion with God. And that's the purpose of it, because if we can somehow meld those two primary forces together, then it creates the kind of life that greatly speeds up the evolution of the soul. And so instead of another 100,000 people in that stadium, we might only have 1 or 2 or 3 more, or we might fall off the bench at the end of this lifetime and not have to come back. Because if we can end the lifetime without having a desire to return, then we won't return. And that has a physical, or one could say a astral physical element to it. Master said that when we die, the soul, the energy of the soul shoots up the astral spine, shoots up the Sushumna to leave the body. And for almost everybody, it leaves through the medulla, the area of the medulla, not the medulla itself. That's just the brain element. But it leaves through that area that represents the ego, meaning that if we die with unfulfilled desires that we want to come back to fulfill, or regrets that we have to work out, any of those things that compel us to come back, then we will have to reincarnate. But he said, if that soul's energy coming up can pass through the medulla to the spiritual eye and go out through the spiritual eye, then we go out into freedom. So what is it that we do every morning and every evening? We practice trying to bring the energy up through the medulla to the spiritual eye, so that, as Swami put it, so that we are preparing ourselves for that final exam. And if we can do that at the time of the final exam, then we don't have to come back to that stadium or a different stadium anymore. We're done with it. And that's what Master said to Swami. You won't find God until the end of life. And so I think that what he was saying, this my interpretation of it, is that the ray that he brought, that Master brought, these great souls brought, the ray is a very important ray to bring higher consciousness into the world. That was their mission. And we being part of that, we have to be busy about our Father's business until the end of life. So he said to Swami, your life is one of intense activity and meditation. And I think that applies to most of us. We're intensely active, but we're doing our best to meditate. But the combination of those two together will, if not in this lifetime, very soon, the last few ticks of the clock will bring us to the point where we have the self-identification with God, or as one of the aspects of God, and that will bring us into what Master defined as Christ consciousness, and it will bring us into the state of self-realization, the realization of who we truly are. Okay.
Thank you, Jyotish. That was very inspiring. Well, thank you all for coming. And just being a part of this beautiful family. I think I'd like to start by reading a passage from the New Path. And this is one of the more interesting passages and a little obscure, but I just love reading it. Oh, I've read it many times. And this is in the chapter His Last Days, so it's toward the end of the book. And when talking about the last few days before Yogananda went into Mahasamadhi, left the body. And the chapter starts, as Jyotish was starting, saying, or as he spoke throughout his talk, that we've had many lives. We've been it starts off Swami asking Master, have I been your disciple before? Oh yes, many times, but don't think about it, And Swami asked him, has it been thousands of lifetimes? And Master said, it's been a long time, that's all I'll say. And I think it's true for all of us. Once we were serving, Swami was hosting another spiritual teacher in the early days of Anand, and we were having a big Indian meal at the seclusion retreat in the dining room, and I was serving their table, and he leaned over to this other spiritual teacher, and he said, look at all these young people. We were young then. He said, look at all these young people. They're so dedicated. They would have to have been with Master many lifetimes before. And I was right there hearing that, and I thought he was saying that for us, not this other man couldn't have cared less. But it was just and I said that to all of you too. People don't come to this. This is not a path for beginners. This is a path for people who see the end of the tunnel. Whether we can get through that tunnel or not in this lifetime, not that important. But if you just see the end of the tunnel, then Master draws you. And he said, I will show you the way. I've been seeking God for many lifetimes, and now I will show you the way out through to the light at the end of the tunnel. And so I want you all to appreciate that about yourselves, because we often, I think usually, I would perhaps say always, we sell ourselves short spiritually. We undervalue who we are because we see all the mistakes that we've made and the desires we still have and all these things. But one of the great gifts Swamiji gave us was he saw the highest in us, and he related to the highest in us always, always. And so many times, I would be going through a difficult time, and he would just say a little something, or just the way he looked at me, and it was like, you're better than that. Remember who you really are. And it was such a gift, because he was, we were with him for many years, and now he's been gone passed in 2013, so it's 13 years this year. But as time goes by, I really appreciate more and more his spiritual greatness, which in his humility and in his discipleship to Master, he kept it very veiled. He kept his spiritual greatness veiled. But the way he worked with everyone and what he was able to accomplish, and the faith he gave in us and in our own ability to grow spiritually and to find God, in fact. He didn't ever lower the bar. He held the bar high, but he also gave us the self-confidence that you can do this. And that was, he didn't need to do that. He could have just gone about writing his books and teaching and composing amazing music. But so much a part of his work, which goes unseen, except in the hearts of those who felt it and can continue to feel it. That's such an important thing. He is not gone. He is very much present in the lives of those who try to attune to him. So this is all a preface to the passage I'm going to read, which is about the continuity of the soul and how the soul, in its search for God, comes together with like-minded souls. The soul does tend toward a long repetition of outward associations in its relationships with other souls. An example here may help. In the nebulous gases of infinite space, the atoms drift about at great distances from one another. The average, so I have read, may be as much as 17 miles between atoms, much too far for their gravitational fields to attract one another. But if two atoms happen to drift together, their combined field makes it easier for them to attract a third atom. For three, it is still easier to attract a fourth. Thus, an occasional ball of matter keeps on growing until its gravitational field encompasses at last a radius of many millions of miles. At some point in this process, a mighty implosion occurs as nebulous gases are sucked inward from vast distances. The gravitational force of this huge mass becomes so great that changes occur within the structure of the atoms themselves. A shining star is born. The soul, similarly, in its gradual progress toward divine wisdom, develops the, quote, gravitational power by which it attracts and holds the understanding it needs for enlightenment, until at last, in the firmament of living beings, it becomes a veritable star. In the same way, too, the soul develops the gravitational pull to form meaningful and lasting relationships with other souls. Gradually, in its outer life, it and others with whom it is spiritually compatible form great families of souls that return to Earth or to other planets to work out their salvation, not only inwardly on themselves, but by their interactions with one another. To achieve divine emancipation, it is necessary to spiritualize one's relations with the objective world and with other human beings, as well as with God. That's very important. To find God, it's not just about us, it's about how we live with other people. The stronger the family, spiritually speaking, the greater its attractive pull on new souls that may still be wandering in search of an identity of their own. A family evolves with its individual members. At last it... okay, let me read that again. A family evolves with its individual members. At last, it too becomes a star in the firmament of humanity and begins to produce great souls of self-realization. As spiritual stars, such great families become powerful for the general upliftment of mankind. Like stars too, then they draw planets of less evolved families into their beneficial auras, vitalizing them with rays of divine truth. Such families are like mighty nations. To them is given the real task of guiding the human race, not in the way governments do by official ordinances, but by the subtle spiritual influence. Yogananda's is one such family. His forms part of a greater spiritual nation of which Jesus Christ and Sri Krishna in the sage Babaji are also leaders. Yogananda, like William the Conqueror at Hastings, came to America to establish a beachhead, not in this case of worldly conquest, but of divine communion. Many have been born and are being born in the West to assist him in his mission. Many others are being attracted to it for the first time by the radiant magnetic influence, the spiritual, quote, gravitational field it has created. So that's well worth reading again and again. So it's in that chapter, His Last Days. But this is the story of Ananda. Don't you see? We've been doing this a long time, even though we may not remember. Every once in a while, we get a little glimpse. Oh, Master, I knew you before. Christ, I remember seeking you and praying to you in my little cell for many, many lifetimes. But then so we've been doing this a long time, and we need to understand that communities are produced by this gravitational pull. It's not anything outward. It's not, as you all know, we were 7 years into building Ananda Village, and then God decided it was time to maybe start over. So the whole thing burned to the ground. We had nothing, but we were still a community. We still had each other. We still had our love for God. We still had our faith in Master. And it was rebuilt amazingly easily, and better. And so we need to understand that this avatar for Dwapara Yuga, our Guru, Yoganandaji, he came at this time in this changing of ages from Kali Yuga, which is defined by hierarchy and rules and religious dogma and group consciousness rather than the importance of the individual. So he came to help with all of us, his army, to come and say, let's show a different way of life. Let's create a way of life, whatever the outward, whether it's in India or Portland or California, it doesn't matter. The cultures, the languages are different. I remember once a number of years ago, we were giving some programs in Croatia. And they had just they'd gone through kind of a civil war, and it was just kind of stabilizing. And it wasn't easy. There was a curfew that everybody had to be home at a certain time, But we gathered, and we didn't understand Croatian, obviously, but they said, we will chant for you in Croatian, but listen to our devotion. You won't understand the words, but you can understand the devotion, and we certainly could feel their devotion. But Yogananda came at this time where he needed to have models of how to live not in the Kali Yuga style. And Swami did such a beautiful job of creating this non-hierarchical, not, I'm going to tell you what to do. He was such a remarkable leader, spiritual leader, because he had been with Master. We were all new. I mean, what did we know? But he never ever said, well, don't you think you should listen to me because I was with Master? He wanted us to tune in and discover for ourselves, and this non-hierarchical approach to creating an organization, and not based on dogma and rules, but self-realization, self-discovery. Don't do it because I tell you, but you need to experience it yourself. And just all the implications, the new expression of education, the new kind of leadership, the new approach to religious teachings, new approach to marriage and relationships based on a deep spiritual sharing and a common goal to find God. And so really what Master said, that spiritual communities will be the lifestyle of Dwapara Yuga. And what does that mean? What did he mean by that? It's the consciousness. It's the consciousness of cooperation and harmony. In the early years, Jyotish was the first general manager of Ananda, and I was the secretary for, we were not married at the time, I was the secretary for the village council, and they would meet every week. And it was very formative years of Ananda, and really like the Wild West, very much, in the sense that some of the people that were there understood the deeper purpose, but many didn't. But at these village council meetings, it was so interesting because unless there was 100% consensus on any new idea, we wouldn't do it. We wanted and then sometimes people didn't think it was a good idea, but they say, well, I want to cooperate. I want to do what the group thinks is best. So if there was 100% consensus, then we would act on it. But this harmony and self-discovery rather than authority and rules. And that, one feels that here. I mean, watching these events the last couple of days was like, wow, everybody's doing it. It wasn't just one person, now you do this and you do this and you do that. But I'll do this, I'll cook the meal, I'll set up the tables, and such a beautiful expression of cooperation and harmony and attunement. And so this is the expression, and it's not that, the purpose of it is to show a new kind of consciousness. So is it important? The Master said the essence of these World Brotherhood colonies, as he called them, was plain living and high thinking. So simplicity, and you can live a simple life and still have a very comfortable life. It's a matter of inner non-attachment. Swami's home was always beautiful. He always had lovely things. He had a very refined taste, but he wasn't attached to anything. In fact, the tulip gardens at Ananda, which he told our gardeners, our head gardeners, Netri and Jivada, he said, I want you to create world-class gardens here. He didn't see them for 10 years. He was in India. Finally, we had to say, Swami, because we saw he didn't have a lot of years left. You must come back and see the tulip gardens at least once. And all right, I will. But he wasn't, it was just a creative expression of divine beauty, just as all those little cards on our table last night. And it was so beautiful watching that one season when, because we get many visitors, 20,000 people come through for the month to see the tulips. And most people didn't know who Swami was. And he would just be, we would see him sometimes, he'd be standing on the little walkway outside the Crystal Hermitage Dome. And he was enjoying the people's enjoyment. He didn't have to say, well, how do you like my gardens? It's my idea. But he just stood there with such humility and the joy of God, because something remarkable had been created. It didn't matter that it was his idea or anything, but just that ability to create something and offer to God. That's plain living. It doesn't mean I don't have anything, I don't have a bank account or anything like that. It's a spirit of, if you give me more, I'll take more. If you take it all away, and that's what we learned in the fire. You take it all away, I'm still here. You can't, even if I died in that, I would still be here. We shared a story when we were in Seattle recently, not very well known, something that happened during the fire, that there was one death caused by the fire, and that was of a pilot, an airplane pilot who worked for the Forestry Service, who was dropping flame retardant on the fire, and he lost control of the plane, and he crashed and he died. That was the one fatality from the fire. But about 15 years ago, so that would have been maybe 30 years after the fire, this woman came to the Expanding Light for a weekend. She signed, we didn't know who she was. She, signed up for the weekend, came, took it, and then just as she was checking out, she told the person at the desk, she said, my father was the pilot who was killed in the fire, and this is weekend of his birthday, and I came here to celebrate with him. And our family was always so proud that our father gave his life for such a beautiful cause as Ananda. And, you know, just that's the spirit. People can see it. I mean, at that time, Ananda wasn't beautiful. It was ragged, and then when he saved it, it was, or, you know, fought to save it, there was nothing left. But coming back, she could see what he had given his life to help to preserve. And so plain living, to really the core of that is to say, nothing is mine, everything is yours, God. If you give me more, I'll take more. If you take it away, I'm with you still. And so in your building community in Portland, just with that attitude, and it's here already, I'm just, as they say, literally preaching to the choir, but just to understand that it's not what we have that makes us happy or makes us important or makes people look up to us. It's the spirit with which we live our life. And once we were in India, Swami, just the very beginning, and we were flying from one city to another in India. We were with Swamiji, and it was a very crowded plane, so Swami was sitting in a different section of the plane than we were, and he was dressed in Western clothes. He just had a sport jacket on and a suit and a shirt and a tie, and we were landing and getting off the plane, and he was walking up the aisle past us, and he kind of nodded and waved, and these two Indian men who were seated behind us said, "Who is that man?" And we said, "That's Swami Kriyananda." And the one Indian man said, "India needs more men like him today." He was walking up the aisle of an airplane dressed in Western clothes, you know. But it's the power of our consciousness. And so plain living, that's such an important part of community. Just to say, if it's needed, I'll give. If I can, I will. And not to look at limitations, but just it's all a flow of energy. And then high thinking, of course. That's so important in the spirit of cooperation. To, if someone rubs you the wrong way, or you disagree with, or they're doing something that you think is a mistake, just to see it in the highest possible way, and to support the individual. One time, our son always had a lot of energy. He's grown now and be 50 years old this month. But he was always getting into trouble. And so one time he had done something bad, and I don't know bad, he had done something, and we disciplined him. And then Swami came over, and he went up to Swami, and he said, he was about 4. He said, "Swami, do you like bad people?" And Swami must have tuned in. He said, "I like bad people. I don't always like the things they do." And I thought that's a very good guideline. Just love the people. You don't always love the things they do, but separate their actions from how you approach them. But these twin qualities, plain living and high thinking, form the basis of what communities are. And as Master said, it will spread like wildfire. When? We don't know. It isn't now. But one tends to believe what an avatar says. And why? Because it's the age, as the age evolves, it's natural that people won't want to live in kind of cities based on competition and disharmony and divisiveness. Because another thing Master brought was the sense of world brotherhood. We are all children of God. Race and nation and religion, none of these are real distinctions. The only distinction there is that each one of us is on our own spiritual journey toward unity with God and with each other. And having one of the beautiful things about being part of a spiritual community for all of my adult life is to watch the transformation of people. It's so beautiful. And one time we were giving a talk at one of our centers, and there was a woman who was a little skeptical, and we asked her questions. She said, well, why aren't there any enlightened people at Ananda? And what do you say? I said, well, how do you know? I said, I watch my friends become saints. And maybe they don't have powers, and they're not, as Shakespeare said, strutting and fretting their hour upon the stage. But in their humility, in their devotion, in their dedication to God, they've become saints. And so the purpose of community, twofold. To create a magnetic family with a gravitational pull that can, when people come, and that's what happens with the tulips. People say, what is this place? What do you people do here? And we finally started adding how to meditate classes, and we get a lot of people coming to them because they feel something's happening here. They can see the tulips, and then one time these two policemen pulled up in a police car. They didn't have the siren going, but they came out and they had all their, guns and all their stuff. And one of the people who was a guide that day, host, came up to them and said, officers, is there a problem? And they said, oh, no, we just came to see the tulips. Okay. And they showed them around. So, twofold, the purpose of communities. One, to create a magnetic field that people can look to as a harbinger of the future. And that's really what it is. Understand that. It's not for now, but it's showing the way to the future by showing cooperation, selflessness, search for God. So for our own, to draw that and be a model for the world. But then it also, Master said, the time for knowing God has come. I really feel, and I've seen it with my friends, that those who give their lives in service to Ananda are drawing closer to liberation, to freedom, spiritual freedom, and oneness with God. So it's a great gift to be a part of this movement and to have that ability through our own practice to work out our karma, to grow spiritually, to transcend our limitations, and then finally to show others that there is a better way. And so we've done, Ananda is just beginning. Really, we celebrated its 50th year in 2019, so it's, 57 years. But that's a drop in the bucket for Dwapara Yuga. And interesting that Master came beginning of Dwapara, 1920. And so this will continue. This work will continue, and it will grow more and more until, as Master said, it will be the lifestyle for the New Age, for Dwapara Yuga. So, on behalf of this great line of which we have been drawn, they thank you for the work that you're doing, both individually and as social service. So thank you.
So, okay, here comes Badri with some questions.
Ice cream cone time.
Ice cream.
So yeah, we'd just like to open it up. If anyone has questions, I'll bring the mic to you. Anyone? Oh, okay.
You get double karma points for the first question.
I try to be polite and wait, and I just, it's not in me. So I'll try to be succinct. I'm seeing this timeline that started several months ago, making it up. Watching the two of you on the TV set, talking about the time is here to move away from the old community dwelling system that had gone through all these changes with lack of contracts and that kind of thing. And it's time for you all to move into the new system, leave the old behind, move into the new, is what you said, right?
Right, more or less.
Talking about,
Yeah,
yes.
Portland.
Yes, talking about and on to Portland. Up through all this time where I've been living in the community, and there's this is all my judgment, my opinion only. This, let's see what happens. Let's don't do anything. Let's don't move forward. Let's see what happens. And this is just my opinion. And then, not coincidentally, within this past week, I believe, the new orders from on high, from the landlords come out. Here's the new leases. Here's the way you're going to live here. Here's what it's going to cost you. Here's what you don't get to do. Have come out to me and a lot of other people's communities saying, okay, to me saying, well, here's your answer on what's going to happen here. Has your message of the time for change, the time to move forward, the time to let go of the past and move into the new changed at all as we've seen things around us? In my opinion, change or not change, as the case may be. So it's kind of a long, convoluted question that's kind of,
It's a good question.
Thank you.
An important question.
Yeah, it's a very important question. And, we're all undergoing a group experiment, and we're at the early part of a group experiment. So here the real essence is, what is community? And what form should community take? And it started out more than 50 years ago with one rural, really when I first came to Swamiji, Ananda community was the size of his living room. And that's what it was. And gradually it grew to the seclusion retreat for those of you who have been to Ananda village, then a year or two later to the village itself, and gradually it was one rural community. But then the time came where the realization came to us that not everybody could or wanted to come to live in a rural community or in one single community. And we needed to bring the sense of community out beyond that first community. And that's when we started the movement to urban communities. So this was about 1978, 79. Devi and I helped found the first big, one could say, urban community, which was in one house in San Francisco, was a 44-room mansion. We had about 30 people living together. And then that segued into the community that is now in Palo Alto, and so on. So anyway, we established communities along the West Coast. Now, a couple of things happened in that process. One was the form of getting the physical property was difficult for a group that was still coming together amorphously. And so here in Portland and other places also, a group of investors who did not live in the community itself invested the money to buy the community. So that meant the ownership and the community itself were by and large separated. There was some overlap, maybe, I don't know what it is in Portland, maybe 40% overlap, 30% overlap, but the rest is not. But what that means is that that disconnect means that there are kind of two different I don't want to say purposes, but two different agendas for what should happen. One is we want just simple living and the ability to be together and live together and not have to think about a whole lot of things. And the other is we need to protect our investment. And here are the rules and the rents and all of that that's needed. And that disconnect is not really viable anymore. Now, Ananda Village has a much better model, which is that nobody owns anything at Ananda Village. Some people own the fact that they have, nobody owns their houses at Ananda Village. It's all owned by the community itself. And some people have donated money or loaned money in order to build a structure. And if they leave, and this evolved over time, I won't go into it, but if they leave, those who haven't donated their housing or the money that built the housing have the right to take it out, but not with a huge profit, just with the cost of living increase. So we've done everything we can to disconnect ownership from the community, and so that the group itself owns the community. Some other of the urban communities are moving in that direction, but it's hard. One of the problems is that as conditions change, then the kind of island of the desire to have a community based on simple living and high thinking becomes harder and harder to do. And if the rents around the community become really high, then it isn't viable to keep the rents as low as we would like to keep them. So this is a long-winded way of getting to the point that my personal opinion is that we need more flexibility than the traditional model of urban community where we own an apartment building or we rent an apartment building, lease it as a group from outside owners. It doesn't allow much flexibility. A few years ago, I realized that our thought of community as a place that we all live together is only true in four or five places in the whole world. The four communities, Seattle, Portland, Sacramento, and Palo Alto, that are urban communities. Then Ananda Village is a little bit outlier. So we think that's the model of community. But in fact, the whole rest of the world has a different model. The whole rest of the world of Ananda, the whole rest of Ananda's world of communities has a different model, which is we're focused around a teaching center or a church, and people generally either buy or rent property near there, and the real community is the community of people that are functioning together, not the community of housing, which becomes difficult and inflexible. And so that's more the model that we're beginning to shift to here in Portland, whereas the real community is here. And that's why all the energy is being put into this, the gardens, the new renovations, the energy vortex that's here. And the more we can magnetize that energy vortex and disassociate it from property ownership. But who owns the church? The church does. No individual owns it. No outside person who wants to raise the rent on the church owns the church. You all own it together. And so group ownership works pretty well, but individual and especially exterior outside ownership of property that you want to keep as a community doesn't work very well. And so in Italy, they have the biggest retreat in all of Europe. Biggest yoga retreat in all of Europe. Thousands of people come every year. Almost nobody owns their housing in Assisi. Maybe 10 or 15 people, but they have a community of 150 people. They all rent or they have places nearby that community, and the central vortex of energy is that way. Same in India. So the only 4 places in the world of Ananda have the urban community model. And as we've seen, 2 of them are not being able to look like they're going to be able to continue because the outside owners have a different agenda, by and large, than the people who are resident. The other 2, Seattle and Sacramento, they've managed to have all of the ownership be by the people who either live or are close part of the. So I guess the end result is that we're in a process of discovery of what actually can work, what can really make a viable community. And you all are on the cutting edge of one of the new experiments. Can what you're doing right now create a viable community where you have a really high energy vortex here that produces the magnetism to hold a community of like-minded souls together in a sense of communion and opportunity and support and all of that without having the physical footprint of it? And as Swami said to Devi and me one time, I'll be watching your career with considerable interest. So Devi and I will be watching this experiment with considerable interest because I personally think that it is probably, you're on the cutting edge of what we will evolve into for urban communities. But it's an experiment. We're all trying to do the best we can given the circumstances we have inherited. So does that answer?
I'll just add a few little thoughts. That was a very clear and good answer, Jyotish. Swami said that Ananda communities were living laboratories. And you see what works and what doesn't work. And, if it's always evolving. And Swami he never, much to our dismay sometimes, got locked into form. Like if he didn't like the direction, and he did this several times, that the publishing house, which became Crystal Clarity, if he didn't like the direction it was going, if it was too form-bound, too business-oriented, he would just start another one. And it wasn't until, I guess it's Badri's mother-in-law, Gita's mother and Badri's mother-in-law, Padma, now Swami Padma took over Crystal Clarity, that Swami said, yes, okay, now we have a form that I really feel is right. And so he watched, and he watched what was working and what wasn't working. And you don't need to blame people. You don't have to say they're bad or they're greedy or whatever. It's just communities are evolving things. And if something isn't working, if the constraints are too blocking the flow of energy, then you look for another form. And so it's actually, if you step back a little bit, it's just a process. And Nitai, who started the first school at Ananda, the first Living Wisdom School, he said something very interesting. I was talking with him in the process of writing the book I finished, Divine Awakening, and he said, education for life could only have emerged in the crucible of a cooperative community where there was the freedom to explore new ideas. He had been a public school teacher, and he had tried to introduce new things, and he couldn't do it. It was only in the freedom of the openness of a Dwapara Yuga community. And I think the other model of rent and owners and raising the rent and all that, Kali Yuga. And so we're trying to find a new model. And as Jyotish said very wisely, and we want to give you our support and admiration to go forward, that you're creating a new model now. And don't be afraid. Ananda is about creating new models, if anything. And it's a gift. It's a gift to the world.
But it's really important to understand that community is your association with each other, and association in support of, for each of you, the expansion of consciousness. That's community, not any physical aspect. Physical aspect just, in some cases, makes that easier. In other cases, it makes it harder because you're forced to focus on the physical aspect of whatever it is. So it's consciousness that we're working with.
After the forest fire, when the community was burnt to the ground, there was really nothing left. The Hansa temple was left, but that was the publishing house at the time. But about 2 or 3 days after the fire, Swami called a meeting. And he was just calm and centered. It wasn't like, oh God, we've lost everything. How can we possibly go forward? He just talked with everybody and he said, okay, we have several questions we need to solve. How do we earn money? Who's willing to go out and work to earn money to rebuild? Because we had no insurance at all. And people had put all their savings into building the houses that were destroyed. And just many, many hands went up. Oh, I'll go out and work. I'll get a job. And then he asked, does anybody know of jobs we could get together as a group to go out? And someone said, I know there are contracts from the Forestry Service to go and plant trees in deforested areas. And so I said, who would like to do that? A whole bunch of hands went up. And then he said, okay, now we also have the question, where are we going to live? We have no housing here now. And somebody said, it was against the county regulations at the time to bring in little temporary trailers. Somebody said, I think I'll go to the county and see if we can get permission during this rebuilding time, if we can bring in little trailers for people to live in. And we got permission. So we found an income source, we found a way to live, and so it was all lost. But in the matter of a few days, we got the vision of how to go forward. And it was like, phew, never missed a beat. So
there was one more thing that happened with the fire, and it's happening here too. Not that you've had a fire, you've been fired, I guess. But it's
or you could say you've been burned. But
yeah, right. But happening here, that at Ananda Village, so this was like 6 years into the history of the community that the fire came. There were people who came at the beginning, and they were, by 6 years later, they were at Ananda, but not in Ananda. They were just kind of there living, hanging out. They weren't really participating in community things very much. I don't know, not all of them were even meditating. And so when the fire came and we had to rebuild, the people who didn't want to live in the new energy field, they found other places to live. And so I think what's going to happen is, as the movement, as people are forced to rethink whether they're going to live in community, in the Portland community as we've known it, maybe you'll continue to rent there the way you'd rent anywhere, but it won't be the center of community. And those who really want community will either relocate their energy field here, or they will kind of drift away from this, not physically located, but from the sense of community. And so those who really want to be in community will be in the community that's forming here, wherever they happen to live physically.
And one other aspect, and maybe it's enough on this topic, some donations came in, just from people who were supportive of Ananda. Not a lot, but some tens of thousands of dollars. And what did we do with the money? We gave it to the people who are leaving, because we said we have community. We'll be here for each other, but they're going out on their own. So we just gave it to them. And, here we are these many years later, 50 years later, and, I don't know where those people are, but I don't think they've had the same quality of life that we have.
But returning back to the central theme, the fire wasn't about the fire. The fire was about a test that allowed us to expand our consciousness. And the loss of that community is not about the loss of the community, assuming that that's what the direction is. It's about the opportunity to expand consciousness by all of you working together to create something new and bigger and better. And it's a grand experiment.
And opportunity.
Yeah, because you're going to, just as Ananda Village was a way shower for a model, you all will be a way shower in America for a model. It's worked in Europe and it's worked in India, but will it work here? Well, we'll find out. I think it will. I think it can. I know it can.
Thank you, Jyotish and Devi. I look around and I think it very much is working here.
Yeah.
And we'll continue to experiment. Anyone else? Is there one or two more questions out there this morning?
Okay, one more.
Yeah, one more question and we'll take a break. Anyone?
Okay, just before we take a break,
Yeah.
I'm going to give the last homework assignment, the same one that we gave to that group of young people at Ananda. So get ready either to write or just to think. We asked them, what in the next year are you personally ready to commit to do to create a viable community?
Yeah.
So what in the next year are you personally willing to do to help create a viable community here in Portland?
And it was quite beautiful at the retreat. We said, you don't have to say it, share, you keep it in your heart. But people wanted to share and went, I'm going to clear that path that leads to Master Statue, and I'm going to plant the tree that, and it was just like, wow, the energy was so beautiful.
Okay, we'll take...
So Badri, tell us what we do now.
Well, let's just take a minute or two.
Yeah,
Folks want to reflect or write that down,
Okay.
and then I'll share
Okay.
this next little transition. Thank you. Okay, let's go ahead and finish that up. As Jyotish said, there's more time for that later as needed. We're going to take just about a 5-minute or so break and then come back in here. And as we wind down our retreat together, we'll have a fire ceremony as we do each Sunday. A little bit different, but basically the same with the mantras we'll explain. And then we're going to have a song and a closing meditation together. So let's just take a short break and we'll gather back in here in about 5 minutes.
Jyotish? Hi.
What did I want to say?
I close my eyes, it's easier.
Just a couple of things. Well, a question. I guess you said on Thursday night you were talking about basically people who can't meditate, worth a hoot, like me. Sometimes, I look back and go, God, I've been doing this a long time, man. I don't meditate any better or deeper than I did 10 years ago. I get all I kind of understand the intellectual, the philosophical reasons why I should keep going, but sometimes it's just, oh man, if it hasn't come by now, you had some wonderful words, and I don't remember what they were, but I came away with a lot of hope and inspiration, and so I thought, if I could get you to say something like that again, for the larger group, but also for me.
sing it 3 times through. Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah, teach you to chant one.
Sure. Chant 1.
Go to lyrics and chant one.
There we go. So if you need the words, they're up there on the screen, but let's do join hands and again feel our oneness in the sea of spirit as we sing together 3 times, joined in prayer. Oops. The oldest sea. Joined in prayer, we worship thee. Rays of light that seek the sun. Many drops to make us see. Thus our love when joined as one. Thus our love when joined as one. Joined in prayer, we worship thee. Rays of light that seek the sun. Many drops to make us see. Thus our love when joined as one. Thus our love when joined as one. Once more. Joined in prayer, we worship thee. Rays of light that seek the sun. Many drops to make us see. Thus our love when joined as one. Thus our love when joined as one. Okay, we're going to finish with just a brief meditation together. So again, thank you so much to Jyotish and Devi for this morning and to all of you for being a part of this. Let's just close in inner silence. We'll have one chant and we'll close about 20 minutes of meditation. So make yourselves comfortable and we'll begin in just a moment. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee.